Hi, I'm Pam Morton, the Executive Director of the National Basketry Organization. We want to welcome you to NBO Presents at Textile Talks, presented by Surface Design Association. We're excited to have you join us today for our first NBO Presents of 2026, Basketry Now Revisited. Our panel will discuss the NBO's biennial exhibit, Basketry Now, held from July to October 2025 at Textile Center in Minneapolis. The artwork showcased the best in basketry from across the country and included entries from 64 artists as far away as the UK, Italy, and Australia. Today's program is hosted by Emily Dvorin. The panelists are Gyöngy Laky, our juror, Carol Eckert, and Peeta Tinay. This should be a fascinating discussion about the contemporary world of basketry. We will be putting links in the chat throughout the program for you to copy. If you lose the chat, email Lucy at textiletalks@saqa.org. We'll put that in the chat as well. And let's get started.
I'm so pleased that you could join us today. I first want to thank everyone who made this exhibition that we're going to talk about happen. Thank you to National Basketry Organization's Exhibitions Committee. Thank you to Tracy Crum and Liz Stensland of Textile Center. Thank you, Gyöngy Laky, for being our juror. And thank you to SAQA, or Studio Art Quilts Associates, and SDA, Surface Design Association, for generously allowing us the opportunity to give this webinar as one of your textile talks. The National Basketry Organization is an inclusive community of about 600 makers and enthusiasts whose mission it is to promote awareness, inspire creativity, and foster appreciation for the heritage and artistry of basketry. Basketry Now was on view from July to October of 2025 at Textile Center in Minneapolis. It was a National Basketry Organization exhibition that broadly surveyed artistic expressions in basketry created by established and emerging artists and makers. This juried exhibition showcased diverse approaches that demonstrated superior craftsmanship, thoughtful design, and original concepts. Right now, you are looking at some still images of the exhibition. We're here today to talk about this spectacular exhibition and further discuss what is going on in the field of basketry. Let me introduce our panelists. Gyöngy Laky is our juror, sculptor. She was born in Budapest, Hungary in 1949, founded Fiberworks Center for the Textile Arts in Berkeley, California in 1973. A 2022 book not to be missed, Gyöngy Laky, Screwing with Order, Assembled Art, Actions, and Art Practice. It's with Almodshire Art Publisher in Germany. Carol Eckert. Her work has been exhibited extensively and is included in many public collections. In addition to her studio practice, she maintains a daily blog focused on contemporary basketry, and she works as an independent curator and writer. Peeta Tinay. She started her career in 1990, becoming a restorer of antique and contemporary wicker furniture. She now uses the same weaving materials, round reed and flat reed, and cane to create large-scale, intricate basket structures. And then there's myself, Emily Dvorin. I'm known for my innovative, what I call transordinary vessels made with everyday common materials, using traditional basketry techniques in a non-traditional way. I exhibit, teach, lecture, and mentor all around the country. Now I would love to have Gyöngy tell you or comment a bit about this particular exhibit before we go on to get into a panel discussion about some basketry, what's happening in the field of basketry. So, Ginge?
Thank you very much. It was an honor and a huge pleasure to be invited to be the juror for this exhibit. 215 admissions, and they did, in fact, exemplify what NBO had said in their invitation to the artists: creativity, innovation, um, new, now, very exciting, inspiring work. And for a studio artist, no longer teaching, I'm by myself. So suddenly I was spending a lot of time carefully looking at some wonderful pieces. And I must tell you right away that it was a daunting task. It took quite a number of days because it was very difficult to eliminate any of these wonderful pieces. They were very inventive. They explored all kinds of things, diverse materials, uh, doing interesting new things with ancient traditions. By the way, uh, yes, I'll do the first PR for Carol Eckert and Janet Koplas's wonderful book, Contemporary Basketry. Yeah. And as I looked at the essay that Janet wrote for it, I love this one short phrase: an ancient art form made new. And one of the things that I've been realizing in this process is uh, people making new ideas constantly. Basketry Now 2025, after the wonderful NBO's more than a quarter century, inspiring, teaching, encouraging, supporting, and the Textile Center. Oh, how I wish there were a branch here in San Francisco. I could not go to the exhibit, and so I'm very, very happy, honored. It's a huge pleasure to be here, to see some of the images of the exhibition itself, and to talk with some of my esteemed colleagues. I did go on the website of the Textile Center, and because I just wanted to, I mean, I've looked at the website before, but I wanted to just read it. Quote, a welcoming space for everyone in our community where everyone is accepted, valued, and respected, while fostering a strong sense of belonging for all individuals. We all learned since mid-February just what that means, and the spirit of community in Minneapolis. It meant a lot, and the powerful manifestation of resistance that we now know so much about and has inspired us in other ways. Sitting here in San Francisco, my husband Tom and I were watching The Daily Show in mid-February, and Mayor Jacob Fry came on, and he wanted to applaud the citizens that he respected so much. He began clapping. The entire live audience stood up, cheering loudly and clapping. Tom and I stood up and clapped and cheered. It was an inspiration. And he said, they, the citizens, are truly an inspiration. And then he added, the people here are tough as nails. And what we also know now and appreciate so deeply, clearly, very creative, strong, and inspiring us all over the nation in these rather trying times. I just wanted to add that in the chat list of links, I did put new webinars that are being made now, maybe for the last 2, 3 years, by Julie Annixter, one of Fiberworks' early graduate students, an MFA student. She contacted me and said, Ginge, why don't we find some of the artists and talk about some of the artists no longer here and do some webinars? It's open source. You can enjoy them. You can send them to friends. You can use them in your teaching, whatever you'd like. I would like to encourage you to look at that website. And then also another little PR. My wonderful gallery in Connecticut, the Brown Gotta Arts, you'll find a link to them also. They designed that fabulous book. It's £5, which makes it a bit of a problem, but you might enjoy it. And I'd like to just say that it's an honor and a pleasure to be on this panel with three people who I admire enormously. Thank you.
We sure admire you too. Thanks, Ginge. I want to jump off now from the wonderful exhibit that started all this and get into some more conversation about what's happening with basketry today. I have some questions to get to, and I hope the whole panel can uh, join in the answers. And if you have any questions, we'll try to address them from the chat. So I'm just going to jump in. These are big and little, but wonderful things to talk about. First, let's dive into how are traditional techniques evident in this show? So it would say, how is basketry unique as a bridge between traditional and contemporary art forms? Didn't you want to start with that one since you already started talking about that? What's your reaction to that?
Well, one of the things that came to mind looking at those wonderful pieces and then thinking about textile art and the making of things, uh, and then suddenly it popped into my mind that basically basketry type activity was the beginning of sculpture. It's human beings put their hands on whatever they found around them and they made things and they figured out these very clever, ingenious methods for putting things together. And that spirit somehow is so dominant today in this artwork. I think hands-on activity is maybe becoming more important than it ever has been in my recent life. I'm 82 now. That's a bunch of years. But it just seems like the physical world and the making of things is extremely important. And right now, also, there's much more discussion about how art is very beneficial to human beings, to mental aspects of who we are, as well as emotional. The ability to express over and over basketry now, and tomorrow it'll be new. And people are doing so much with it today that it's a very lively art form.
Peter, what do you think?
Oh, um, oh boy. I
Your
had
work,
something and
your
I didn't
work,
think of it. Oh
your
no.
work very much relates
Oh,
to both traditional and contemporary, shall we say?
right. Um, wow. Okay. I I I think that the one of the main things that as I was looking through the still images before we started was that the amount of time and consideration that each piece as it was being made, like the amount of time that it took that person to kind of figure out their technique and the quiet time that it takes, the curiosity that it takes in order to develop something that really um, kind of becomes someone's look, with kind of how they are able to create something that really becomes them, kind of a trademark look, and just how long that takes. So it's a lot of alone time, which is, I think, kind of I'm guessing maybe a common thread with with everyone who was in the exhibit. The quiet time in the studio to think and consider and be curious as you're making kind of that iterative process, right? So, yeah.
Right.
Well,
Very
when
much.
I'm looking at baskets, I have to admit, I can't recognize specific techniques. I'm not good at that part. I'm looking more at the big picture. The only way I consider technique is sort of if the level of craftsmanship is appropriate to the type of expression that the person, I mean, some people work very loosely and it fits with their final product. Some people are very focused on very tight craftsmanship, which is appropriate to their final expression. But in terms of being able to recognize, say, what is a random weave, that's not my strength at all. I'm just looking at sort of the big picture.
There's always that discussion between traditional and contemporary, and I believe being what I call a contemporary sculptural basket maker, I'm very connected to the roots of the traditional basketry. So it as a bridge between we taught the question asked about a bridge between traditional and contemporary art forms. I'm always very aware that I'm using traditional. My grandmothers used same techniques to create something. But as Ginge mentioned, it's always going to be something new. Even if someone is strictly, quote, traditional, I think that they bring to it some of their newness, some of their particularness, some of their voice, some of their study, their quiet, their social, their whatever they're trying to express is it's based on this wonderful root, the oldest art form, this sculptural basketry root, and it goes from there to something new.
I,
Um,
I,
had
I
to be a
think,
basket maker. Yes,
I think of it as the tradition, the history, the beginning, as
actually.
the beginning of engineering. It was the way people figured out how to make things out of whatever sources they had around themselves. And often I refer to basketry as textile architecture uh, because it moves away from basketry so easily. And that we saw in many of the pieces. People can reach out and take basically discarded whatever and figure out, invent. Actually, that's what I love. This approach in art allows people to invent new ways of making things. And it seemed in several pieces, many pieces that were in the exhibition, that there weren't traditional methods that I recognized. There were non-traditional things. There were new inventions about how to put stuff together. And that I found quite exciting. And then this exhibit got me looking at other artworks, for instance, in the new book. And there are many places now. It just seems like this particular part of textiles and fiber art is now getting a lot of attention. Recently, the Ruth Azawa um, retrospective was here in San Francisco, and her her methods, they fit right in, but they're nothing like anything that I have ever done or ever knew about or ever taught about or ever read about. She created her own, which I saw so often in the collection that was in the exhibition.
Yes. I see quite a few questions in the chat about this. I'm going to ask the next question out of order. We're going to talk about it, but I'm going to bring it up now, which is how is a basket defined? What is not a basket? What are the parameters? Some people were questioning your reference to what's the difference between basket and sculpture. Well, to me, the basket is a kind of sculpture, but let's get into this. How do you define a basket? I'm asked that a lot.
Well, I think you've got two words here. You have
Yes.
basket, which maybe implies some kind of volume. And then you have basketry, which is more like a construction process, like Jen's been talking about. So the basketry world is very broad. And I guess I don't want parameters. I mean, I think the
Uh-huh.
reason
I certainly
that
don't.
it's such an exciting world is because it's a It's a field where there's great respect for tradition, but also a willingness to push the boundaries. And I think it's what makes it such a vital field.
What's not a basket?
Hmm.
I,
Right.
I
I
do
think I
think,
think of
I
a
think
basket mostly as a vessel because I work three-dimensionally. But then again, in a lot of our shows, we have wall pieces, and to me, as long as they have some dimension, they're baskets also. We have and National Basketry Organization does something called a lunch basket, and we have people come to a Zoom meeting and show the piece that they're working on. And sometimes we get asked, well, I'm not really making a basket. Well, I think it's a they question what we define as a basket. And we throw it back at them and say, if you think if you're working on it as a basket, show it to us. You define what a basket is. So it's becoming wider. The definition is definitely expanding.
I think one of the problems I've had before is semantics. I could get so wound up in the semantics of words trying to define a basket. And one of the reasons I started the blog is because I could see things that I couldn't really express verbally. And that's why I started that blog with themes. So if my theme is with handles, I
Yes.
can go from something very traditional to something crazy like an installation outdoors that also references a handle. So I sometimes think it's easier to see the connections visually, at least for me, than it is to define them with words.
I'm so pleased to be a basket maker because I feel I can push those boundaries. Not every art form can you push quite as far, it feels like to me.
You said something about in these lunch basket discussions that people are encouraged to define for themselves. And again, that's what I think is so wonderful about this whole sphere that we all appreciate so much is the new definitions, each individual. And in that exhibition, it was so clear that there was a human being, an individual thinking and planning and doing and creating and inventing in each piece. And many of them were not baskets,
Right.
but they fit in. They seem to all be in the same sphere of exploration, in the sense of what can we as human beings, with our ingenuity and our constant interest in having an impact on the world around us and making things, that we can be active in that way. So that openness about definition is really appealing.
Right.
And I think too that idea, like you mentioned, Emily, the idea of volume, but volume with basketry techniques doesn't just have to be a volume of a vessel. I mean, it
Right.
can be a container, it can be a garment, it can be a shelter. All of those things have volume. And really, like when Ginge was referencing the very early beginnings of baskets, people made all of those things like traps and containers, but they also made ritual objects. So those were objects with a use, but a use not in sort of a practical carry the berries sense, but the idea of a basketry being used for ritual objects goes to the earliest of human experience.
And I'd extend that a little bit. I get asked this a lot. Uh, what's the use of a basket, or are baskets being the assumption from some people that a basket has to be useful? It has to have, it can't just be beautiful or a sculpture or have an art about it. It needs to be used for something. So I think that this exhibition especially shows what's happening in basketry these days. I try to call myself a sculptural basket maker for that reason, to differentiate that everything I make does not have to have, and some can't have a use. How about you, Peeta?
Yeah, that's interesting because when I first started making in a very serious way and doing juried shows, my work was a lot different. It was more what you would consider, it was large scale, but they looked a little bit more like when people fill in the blank in their mind about a basket and kind of the uh everyone that would come through and I'd have conversations with, it would always bring up the notion of like what you had kind of grown up with, what this person had grown up with, and they could definitely, everyone knows what a basket is. Everyone on some level has grown up with basket, vessel, woven form, kind of more of an in a utilitarian way. So I will say part of the struggle with that is that they may have looked at it and loved it, but at the same time, when I was doing these shows early on, there was a value, like a lesser than value, that was attributed to pieces that were more kind of fit in that category of what looked like a basket. People couldn't, in ways, understand why the price was the price, why there's a high price on something. And then when you walk them through some of the steps, if they stuck around long enough, you walk them through the steps of what it took to create what it is that they're seeing in front of them. They had a greater appreciation. So, yeah.
Indeed.
That's a very interesting point I think you made, Peeta, about that uh, we humans, we know a lot
Right.
about baskets and basketry. And I think that could be an aspect of why people respond so strongly and why there's so many artists who seem to be really engaged in working in these ways, because that means there's a way to reach right into the person appreciating the work, because there is a connection, and already a connection. We live in these architected shapes that were made because of basketry and that understanding of how things go together. These huge office buildings in San Francisco, they're all based
Bas
on a grid, which is basically a basketry structure. So what you're suggesting is there's a way in, and then that allows for that extended conversation,
Right.
which I'm appreciating that a lot more. And you said it very, very nicely.
yeah.
Can I make a comment about something that you said earlier, Ginge? And it's about people wanting to do more now with their hands. And just I wanted to make the comment about when I teach, so many people that come to a beginning basketry workshop are within the tech world, right? So they're already using that
Absolutely.
engineering part of their brain. They're already using pattern and structure, but they've gotten so far removed from working with their hands that it's not a stretch for them when it comes to making a basket and learning it and understanding it. And they crave it. So, and I think that we've gotten farther away, but people they're having that desire to come back more into their body with movement and making. And so it's nice to see.
Yeah.
Emily, can we leap ahead to a later question you had? Is it okay to
Sure,
leap
go
ahead?
for it. I
Because
can be formal about it, or you can go leap.
this is one of my favorite current subjects. I've been retired from my professor role since 2005. However, for a number of years, the young people I knew, and then somebody else would send me somebody, they wanted to just hang out in the studio. And um, I would start calling them computer refugees or tech refugees, because they were saying, Ginge, I can't stand it. I love that I got this job in an architecture's office, but I'm sitting in a little cubby looking at a screen all day long, making small marks on what needs to be done in that particular architectural design. And I'm going crazy. I need to get my hands on something. And I actually, when I think much more positively about the world we're in, I think, and AI, I think, is doing this even more. So, Emily, you asked, now where is this field going? Um, I think it is pushing so many of us back to our physical world and our understanding about our physical world. And it is so important. If you don't put your hands on things, you don't know what they are, what they can do. So, yes, Peeta.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I think, and when we move beyond where we are now, to quantum computing, if we can, but it seems like we're heading there. It's even going to be more so. And our physical world and our physical abilities and our human beings with our ingenious ideas and our constant need to redefine and explore, it's going to be more and more important, it seems to me.
It's vital, I think, extremely, extraordinarily important to be an artist, a basket maker, a teacher at these points,
I
teaching
think,
people, showing people how to use their hands and get involved in that way. Carol.
well, another thing that Peter touched on was the time intensiveness. Like so many of the processes related to this are time intensive, lots of alone time in the studio, very time intensive. And do you think, Peter, that people, that's another way in, besides the way in of recognizing a basket from their family, that people are responding on some level to the time, appreciating the time that goes in.
Um, yes. Do you mean students? Is that what you're talking
I
about?
mean, just like a viewer.
Oh,
There is that question that
right.
everyone has probably gotten at some point.
Right.
How
Well,
long does it
This
take? But
right.
most asked
That's
question
the most
ever,
asked question. Right. And
right?
then there's, yes.
but
Yeah,
I just
I think that's the way in. I think it's because they're three-dimensional objects. The texture is people just want to handle them. They want to touch them. They're so curious, right? So that's kind of the first way in is the visual. Then the second part is the wanting to touch and handle. And then the third is the question about how long did this take to make? Or maybe it's not the third question, but
The
yeah,
first for
so,
me.
but I think that's the way in. I do. I think people need to see it. I think they need to touch it. I think they need to be curious about it. And then the other thing is too, is that a lot of people, they'll always say, "Oh, I'm not creative." It's like, has nothing to do with being creative. It's about getting your hands in it and moving your body and feeling it and kind of getting a feel for this is how this works and this is why this works this way. And yeah, so it's a way in, and I think that I mean we've really only had the tech world for maybe, and now I'm going to go out on a limb here and attribute some years, but let's say in a very serious way, 25 years. I know it goes back further than that, but I'm just thinking about people sitting at a desk and doing, programming and all this, and I think that um, we have just kind of slowly stepped away from all the chores and craft of things. It hasn't really been that long, so I think it's still a, a very large part of who we are as human, right? To
Absolutely.
me, I mean, even back in the time, like something is, well, I mean, even like, the canning of food, right? It wasn't that long ago that people were having to, I mean, I would kind of consider that a craft too, and gardening and anyways, right? So
Yeah.
hands-on things. that
Yes.
there's classes for all these things now that people want to learn how to do, that grandparents did, great grandparents did. They want to get back to it. So,
I get that same I'm not creative, but then I get the next question, which is how did you think of that? How did you come up with that? And I didn't know how to answer that for so long, but I finally kind of figured it out in words to say to people, which was I think I look at the world differently. And that's what I feel it's up to us to be doing right now, is to help people look at that world a little differently. Get out of that desk behind that
right,
screen.
right,
Never mind AI, just individually how I look at the world. And that's part of why we teach, and that's part of why we do our art.
right. I
Well,
think we can guide people in the right direction to take that power back.
Yes.
So,
well, it's curious because in a lot of kinds of basketry, there's a lot of math involved. And I read about a program where they were teaching math to children with basketry patterns.
Excellent. Wow.
I actually think it's not the three R's that we should be
oh,
emphasizing in the lower grades, the first few grades. It should be the ART.
mhm,
Yes. I'm afraid that many school systems don't agree with that these days. It pains me, but I'm one of the visiting teachers who goes into starting with third graders and teaches them basketry, which they don't get any other way.
So I'd like to come back to this question of how much time, because it is something that is talked about a lot. And with certain pieces that one would look at, it's an obvious question and an obvious thing that would be curious and important to discuss. However, in the exhibit, there's one piece I can think of for sure, but I think there were a few where it looked like very little time. Something just came together. It was the right thing, just a few lines. It was but so expressive, so poetic. And I would never ask the question of how long did that take, or that must have taken a long time. Because now it could have taken a long time for that to happen.
Right.
But it wasn't the stitch by stitch kind of time. And so, again, that's the breadth and the scope of how people can function in this part of the art fields that we have to to be active in. And well, I don't know what else I was going to say. These days, I'm forgetting mid-sentence. So if that
Well,
happens, just remind me.
I want to throw another question in. Some makers are drawn to basketry because of the community of makers, the tradition, while others are drawn to innovation and exploration. What do you think draws people to the basketry community, particularly makers, collectors, writers, curators? Why the basketry community? That's a
Well,
tough question.
I can tell you what draws me personally to basketry is coiling because it's a technique that I love and I love it because I can adapt it and invent with it. But what draws me to the basketry community is that I've always found it to be a very welcoming place, a place, very generous community with a lot of sharing and a lot of learning going on.
Yes, we do. We don't guard our techniques and say, no, you can't, I can't teach you that. We're very appreciative of sharing.
Mhm.
What else about the basketry, in particular, the basketry community? What's distinctive about the basketry community? Is what I guess I'm leading to.
Well,
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
Carol, you go.
well, maybe part of it relates back to that other question you asked about what's distinctive about basketry in the wider world. And I guess one thing I noticed, like say with a lot of other organizations are media based, there's metals organization and SECA for ceramics, there's glass organizations. But with basketry, you're working with all kinds of materials. So it's more focused on the idea or the concept of basketry rather than on a particular media because people make baskets from clay, from metals, from glass, from all of those different media.
Good point. Ginge, what were you going to say?
Well, it's also it's also easy. I don't know quite how to say this, but it's fairly easy to do something with very minimal materials. I mean, you can just paper, and you could begin working in these kinds of structural ways. Um, even just twisting paper, you could start creating some structural things that are basically based on all that we learned over the years about basketry. So um, I think in a way it's accessible. Now, certain ways of working are less accessible until you learn those ways or explore them carefully. But but I have had the experience that with just a few branches and a little bit of string or whatever, you can start making stuff. And so that helps um, be a, a gathering kind of feeling when you talk about community. It's easy to engage people in these ways with minimal things. Um, Wire, telephone wire, telephone wire. There's bits of it left.
Not so much. Yeah.
But there's another thing about community I think that came into my mind, and that is, we're in the TikTok world. Everything is very quick now. It's very quick, and you text quick, quick. Uh, you communicate quickly and with just a few letters sometimes, and that works. Um, and and this, I think one of the things that is inviting about basketry is it slows us down. It's more contemplative. It's a healing. And art, I think, in that sense is very important because it's the makers, but also the viewers and the appreciators. It's it very easily and importantly gathers people together. So maybe those are all the reasons why even the notion that this has to do with community encouragement.
For sure. I myself have been quoted a lot as saying anything is basket material. So I like to experiment with that. People gift me all kinds of things. I'm going to throw this away. Would you like it? The answer is always yes. And it'll percolate in my studio, and I will be inspired by these everyday materials. And so I'm in a way redefining basketry because anything goes. But in a way, I'm an historian because it's what's around in my universe that goes into a basket. It could be anything from cat food can tops to stethoscopes to I use oddball, what people call oddball ingredients, but it's basketry allows me to do that. That community welcomes me, my use of anything. Uh, and that's the pleasure for me of being in this particular community. Peter, you were
I
going to,
call what you do the industrial harvest.
right, absolutely. You looked like you were going to say something, Peter, about that.
Oh no, I was just listening and I was
Oh,
just
okay.
picturing your work as your yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So I want to go back just to one last question, and then I want to see if there are any questions from our people who are our viewers. But that question of what's next, we got to it early, but I want to sort of end with what's next? How do we see basketry evolving? What are the potential next steps in the field?
I don't know if this is a next step within the field, but the evolution of where I see basketry techniques showing up within people that are doing ceramics, within people that are doing glass. So it's ending up in um, other mediums with basketry techniques. So that's just where I'm seeing it headed. And that's also when I have people that come and take workshops, beginning basketry workshops. I get a lot of ceramics people that come, and they're coming for different reasons with how they want to incorporate basketry, literally with basketry materials and ceramic, or um, where they will actually weave with the ceramic itself. So that's one area I see.
I have seen, I've always said that I could never have been a painter because there was this thing, this brush between my hand and the canvas, the art I was creating. And I probably would have been an okay finger painter, but there's something about basketry and something about teaching it where it is the most hands-on
Right.
type of thing you can do.
Well, one of the things I see happening is an increase in scale, particularly an increase in things like installations and outdoor installations. And a lot of that is happening in other countries outside of the United States.
Yay, we can learn from that.
So
Jim,
coming back to this, it's a good topic, and I am so intrigued by AI. I know we're all freaked out about it, and intrigued by it, and it has so much potential and positive and negative. But it suddenly occurred to me in the middle of our conversation that one of the fears is that it's going to be pushing people out of our current job market in many different areas and in many different ways. And suddenly I was thinking, well, maybe then more people will become interested in our physical world and in making things. And the community could increase.
hope so. Yeah, I'm trying not to be frightened by it.
I agree. I'm trying to. And by the way, I think for most of what we all do, it'll take the robots and tech a very long time to figure out
The-
how to cut my pieces of wood and drill holes and put the screws in or the wire around them.
Good. Anything more on that, Carol? Where we're going?
No, I can only tell you sort of what I see happening. And that's the big one is the like outdoor installations. Like in some parts of Europe, there these big land art festivals, and Gyöngy has been a part of one before, where people are out in the natural environment, gathering what's available and building structures from it. So an awful lot of what's made has basketry kind of references.
Mhm.
I think for our viewers, if you want to want to do a walkthrough of the exhibit that started this whole discussion, that is in the chat. That's a link in the chat, and I find it's worth taking a moment. Maybe our still slides went a little quickly, but taking a moment. This is what inspires me is to see the variety, the diversity, the interpretation of basketry. And I think that every time a National Basketry Organization does a juried exhibit like this, to me, that is what's going on in the field of basketry. That is what's happening. And some people's interpretation of that is expected or what you might expect, and some of it's so unexpected. It's just really worth doing a kind of a walkthrough. Are there any other questions that I missed, Pam? I'm going to ask you from the viewers.
There's a couple of them that I've liked on my screen so I could get back to them. So one is for Carol. How do you gather information for your blog? I've always wondered the same thing. I am blown away. I
Every
get
day,
Carol's
right?
blog every day. There's like five people, it depends, however many people. So how do you do that?
I go down a lot of rabbit holes. I'm on the internet, and one thing leads me from one thing to another, to another, to another. And it's the exciting thing about this field. Every day I find somebody new.
That's
Somebody that I hadn't seen before. Um, it's always exciting. It's the way I start my day, and
yeah,
and it's so much better than reading the newspaper.
Oh,
it's
that's certainly
wonderful.
true. So here's another one. I noticed that this show was heavily on the mixing of materials. It was a beautiful show. What about those of us that stick with one natural fiber and create sculptures out of that? Any thoughts or comments on that? Aside from, I'll just jump in for one thing. It's like for NBO, we run the continuum, as we say someplace on our website, from I hate naming contemporary to traditional because where's the dividing line? Does there even need to be a dividing line? In my mind, as not a maker but an administrator, my answer would be no. So, any of you want to respond to that?
I'll jump into it. The dividing line has never been something that I was particularly conscious of. I identify with those roots no matter how bizarre and out there my work is. I'm still very much doing some traditional things. So there is, no division. The use of materials is where I particularly get my uh, delicious enjoyment. And so anything from, natural materials to industrial materials, all of it is so wonderful and worth it and prized in the basketry community. So I try not to. I don't see a reason to divide that to go there to create any difference between that traditional versus contemporary thing.
Or if we're talking about natural materials, I think the question started with natural materials versus
Right.
made materials.
Mm.
It's a whole nother panel, but there are a
Yes.
lot of people who work with natural materials are finding their choices impacted. If there are people who gather, particularly people who work in traditional ways, are finding environments are being decimated by human activities, and it's a huge problem for a number of people who have traditionally worked with natural materials who are finding ways to adapt because of loss of habitat.
Right.
I just went to a symposium about native foods and growing native foods, and there was a great deal of discussion about um, the art forms and the basketry and the difficulty in that whole gathering process in terms of the damage that we are doing to nature and also the privatization of so much. Also in food, the source for acorns, which are tremendously nutritive and important for health, there are fewer and fewer places for Native people to gather. So, yeah, it's a very important question.
I think there's sort of a follow-up on the one I just asked, but wait, it disappeared. Do you think there's a place for functional basketry within the contemporary basketry world, or do you see contemporary basketry remaining more sculptural?
All of the above, any of that goes. I think that's one of the reasons why the field of basketry is, you know, doing so well in the mainstream people are much more aware of it because anything goes. Any of those is acceptable.
And also, there's a very exciting movement of younger, sort of back to the land people
Yeah.
who are growing their own willow and really focused on making beautiful, functional baskets. So it's a whole very exciting and growing part of the basketry world, is that more functional approach.
Any more questions that we haven't answered?
I think, let's see. Oh, um, I think we're good.
I think we've answered every question. All right. Wow.
Well, pretty much, or covered it in one way or another, I would say. Yeah, and I'm circling back. I've been in the nonprofit arts management sector for many decades. And the one thing I noticed when I came to NBO, having worked like running big open studios programs with 400 or 500 artists or whatever, is basket makers are the most kind and supportive artists that of all the different fields of artists that I worked with. When I got to NBO, I was shocked in the best possible way that you all are so supportive of one another. And I always found that very impressive and still do. And I've been with MBO now for over 10 years. So I want to thank Emily, Ginge, Carol, and Peeta for participating today, sharing your thoughts and especially your wisdom with the audience. A recording of this program will be available next week on our website, nationalbasketry.org, as well as SDA's website. Special thank you to Surface Design Association and Studio Art Quilt Associates for inviting us to bring NBO Presents to Textile Talks. We always appreciate getting to share a little piece of the basket world with all of you. And I think we're like 1 minute before the hour. So
Thank
anything
you for
else?
coming.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
It was a delight.